thanks a lot for the invitation, which gives me the possibility to actually being forced to think more systematically about a few things that, of course, have occupied me, as many of us, in the last years. But it's a kind of first time that I speak about these issues of surveillance and data and big data. I'm really fine with this. I started already, but yeah, as long as you don't give it back to Bernard. So what philosophers usually do when they don't have a clue, or when the question is a bit too complicated, they start dissecting the question, you know, like you gain time and find someone else to blame. So one part of my talk will be to question a bit this kind of identification that only makes sense within a kind of aesthetic realm, you know, this identification of the sensitive or the sensible, and on the other hand, the image of surveillance. You know, the English title of the conference are a bit different. Not to criticize, I think it totally makes sense, but the aesthetic realm might be part of the problem and not part of the solution, so that will be part of my claim. But as I said, not to criticize the conference, because on the contrary, I think, especially also the subtitle of the conference, as Yevgeny also emphasized, is really important. You have to think the politics and the economy of surveillance together, otherwise it doesn't make sense. So yeah, the title of my talk, Postcapitalism, is not mine. It came out of like when I was invited and I had a chat with Christoph on the phone, then all of a sudden there was this title, and of course I was offered to change it, but I refused to, immediately mentioning that then I don't have any possibility to complain about the title. So Post-Capitalism and Surveillance is my talk. And I start with the relationship between politics and economics in relation with surveillance, and the fact that we are slowly witnessing, I think, at the end of nation-state democracy, the free market economy, and the private space of the free liberal subject. All these concepts are in a deep crisis. Basically, there are three, or at least three, arguments why capitalism as we know it, or the kind of capitalism we grew up with, a kind of established political economy and governance doesn't exist anymore, and we have serious problems understanding or labeling to grasp what's going on or to find a name for it. Some people say it's no longer capitalism but a money economy. Others speak of oligarchy. I prefer to speak about that we're moving slowly towards something like a financial feudalism. In any case, it's no longer a political economy as we know it. For those of you who've read Foucault, something like economy as a kind of established field was only established in the 18th century. As a field to be regulated, and a field that can be regulated, that's very important, consisting of something like a stable territory, property, a stable population. So these three elements are important. So basically there are three, and surely more. Think of the whole question of decarbonization that we are facing, or we have to face in the next decades, with a serious impact on our economy and democracy. But the three elements I want to just repeat here, the three elements of this political economy formerly known as capitalism, that it's slowly disappearing today, is first a kind of fixed territory, a sovereign nation state. Think of just the current economic transformations, but also what the conference announcement calls as algorithms and surveillance, I quote, exceeding the boundaries of centralized governmental control. So that's the first thing disappearing, the fixed territory. The second one is controlling a stable population. Think of the massive refugee situation that is bound to just increase with the climate change. And the third one is the whole fantasy of a kind of regulated or self-regulating market, which is totally laughable since the crisis of 2007-8. The two main boosters or agents of this post-capitalist development are financialization and the digitalization, which obviously belong together and are closely linked to a new kind of computational capitalism based less on production than on free labor. But with many of the distinctions I'm going to make, it's not an either-or, it's a kind of slow tendency towards. So this has been widely discussed recently, especially with the publication of Paul Mason's book, claiming that, I quote, an economy based on information with its tendency to zero-cost products and weak property rights cannot be a capitalist economy. So post-capitalism obviously is not like the utopian an utopian idea. So apart from questions of surveillance, this raises a general problem for democracy because the technological innovations that led to cybernetic capitalism devalues work via all the free labor that Web 2.0 or 3.0, whatever, offers to us. And Evgeny talked about that. So now, if we don't think of technology as something either good or evil, and also not neutral, but rather like capital in itself being a social relation, a mode of power, then the question is what meaning or goal we're giving it. And really the question of meaning is for me very important. From a kind of accelerationist point of view, or a Marxist point of view, the question really is whether we can seize these technologies and use them for our purposes, or as David said yesterday, the question is who decides how the algorithms are constructed. I hope I quote him correctly. So that's the question, how the algorithms are constructed. Now, if the architecture of capitalism today or in general is better understood not as a mode of production but as a mode of power, then we need to have a better understanding of how the traditional order or matrix of the three terms, productivity, work, and technology, how this matrix of the three has changed in the last decades and continues to change. Or to put it less in terms of media philosophy or the history of technology, technology is no longer to be seen mainly as a tool for production, and likewise it doesn't make sense for us anymore to define ourselves only as working beings, as beings that produce something. So productivity, work, and technology are in a very different relationship today. So just to stress this point, I think it's very important when thinking about surveillance, free labor, data, big data, there are two elements. The first one, or two hypotheses, and I'm not the first one mentioning them. The first one is technology is no longer to be thought about in terms of production, but directly linked to the human being. So the threshold of technology in the body is becoming more and more important, and not the products. Secondly, there's a radical change in the definition of work. Man or mankind no longer being working beings in the sense of producing external objects. We have occupation, we have activities, and so on. So this is partly an inevitable development, and these changes are due to the digital revolution, automation, robots, etc. And it could be potentially good news, and many people worked on the idea of like reinventing the future via a fully automated work society. All of us working less hours, less years, having a general basic income, and so on. But as a matter of fact, it is not good news, as we all know, because of the way the technologies at hand are applied and used to exploit us and our free labor. And this is how I read also the conference program, that mass surveillance underpins a larger technological and economic complex set to radically reconfigure human interaction. Now, with the digital revolution and the so-called locative turn of the internet, so basically the end of the idea that we're in a kind of cyberspace where no one of us can be personally identified, or our like place where we are cannot be figured out. So with this kind of re-territorialization of the internet, with this comes a shift away from the paradigmatic model of surveillance. It's no longer the panopticon, but as some sociologists argued, we're under the spell of something like a post-panoptical power. So that could be something we should discuss maybe afterwards. Of course, closed circuit and real-time television, CCTV, continue to play an important role, but more and more only for those that are no longer relevant for our society, relevant in an economic sense. The surplus population having dropped out of the economic system, sometimes for good. Pushing it a bit, one could say CCTV is the adequate surveillance tool to keep people outside of the gated communities of the rich or those that nurture themselves well, or however it's put. On the other hand, computational, cybernetic, semio-capitalism, as it's called, is far more advanced than such representational real-time closed circuits. So I want you to be aware of the different temporalities and question of like speed of different surveillance modes. So hence, there are attempts to find another name, like the synopticon or the data variance. I think a problem with all these like labels is that they they take data and information as something that already exists in the first place, to then be documented. There's a kind of naive myth of the given data, as if data is present in itself and just needs to be surveyed or documented. I very much doubt that that's the case. I think the data isn't meaningful in itself. It only becomes meaningful. It's given a meaning, and that's the important political question. And some of the artists that will also speak here, like Trevor, Simon Denny, and so on, I think their work exactly shows that point. You know, just making the visual is not the decisive thing, but like giving it a certain meaning. Now, obviously, there is an increasing parametrization of our society, in which information and data are the kind of currency. And this has huge dangers, as we already heard. But beyond that, there is an element of ignorance and confusion how to deal with the digital as a new media a priori, to use terms of Kittler. So there's some kind of unhelpful, especially on the left, unhelpful apocalyptic reactions or overreactions that makes one think of earlier media revolutions. I don't know, think of us... the invention of like writing and early high cultures, or the invention of book printing, you know, which was like sold for like decades as a means to spread the Bible, which obviously wasn't what it really did. So there's and the digital revolution is like fairly new. So I think what we witness today is a similar situation when dealing with what the German sociologist Dirk Becker called an Überschusssinn, an excess or surplus of sense at our disposal due to the digital revolution. And this time exactly at the interface of man and machine. So we have a highly irritating excess of data, and on the long run it won't help sticking to antiquated concepts of the liberal subject and its privacy. David mentioned that yesterday. But rather, we have to develop new concepts and understanding of freedom. And here the obstacle is not too much of data in itself, but the intransparency and the asymmetry of data. So I argue not so much in favor of like us hiding all our data, but rather doing something against the asymmetry. So the problem is that we haven't found sufficient or the right means to understand and deal juridically and politically, but also philosophically and artistically with the semiotic overproduction of our digital age. And for me that means we haven't found the right poetic means to control the excess of digital science. We don't know enough how to read the data. We don't know how to write or overwrite the algorithms that are ruling us. So these are all like poetic questions. And basically we lack, so to say, data fictional response to the datification of our lives. So what we need, as was said yesterday, we need a new framing of the future. We need a new narrative. And if there's one philosophical or ontological reason or difficulty we have today, apart from the obvious things that go wrong in politics or the economy, but if there's one really ontological reason for the difficulties we have dealing with the problems, is that there's a fundamental change of time. Now, if I say that we live in a different time, I do not mean oh, things are changing so quick and we have difficulties like catching up. But I really mean it in the fundamental, that's why I say ontological sense, that time has changed in itself. Time has stopped being something that comes from the past and moves to the future, and it's also not this kind of circular thing that postmodernism sometimes try to explain to us, but it's literally changed its direction. Namely, it comes from the future towards the present. An indication for the difficulties understanding this, as well as for the failed remedies against the dilemmas of contemporary culture, is a widespread symptom that can be called presentism. Now you find an aesthetic fetishism of the present, not just in technologies ideally shaped for surveillance like Google Now, or the obsession with live logs or any kind of 24/7 documentation or self-documentation. You find it in the strive towards just-in-time production and immediate distribution. I know it from my business, print on demand, or the Amazon drone that was mentioned. And of course you have it in high-frequency trading using historic data while optimizing the order flow. So it's absolutely important to be precise here to understand this presentism and the temporality of our economy today. As long as it can be faster, new big data technologies and applications continue to evolve. Today, as we all know, time is money and more speed is synonymous with competitive advantage. But increasingly, even real time, and that's very important, even real time isn't fast enough. The true ambition is predicting what will happen next. And then there's a move from predictive to a kind of prescriptive analysis. So what Google now actually does is not so much telling us what we should do now, but it's telling us what we will do tomorrow. So that's where the money can come from. So this is a decisive step towards prescriptive, and there's a very new model, I think, of surveillance towards a prescriptive, and we can observe this more and more clearly in all different fields, in all fields of our culture. If we take the economy as the hegemonic field in our society, then we're definitely living in something like a derivative paradigm. With derivatives as really constructions of time, a time binding of present and future, a displacement of the present into the future, and the present value actually being decided not now, but in the future, or from the future. In politics, we have a politics of preemption, preemptive strikes. Whatever Middle Eastern country you bomb, you will find a terrorist afterwards, right? You produce them, so it's a kind of retroactive truth. You have it in medicine, insurance, the kind of welfareism question that I'm sure there's other people who will talk about it here. And with regards to surveillance in general, we're witnessing something, the coming into being of what Rob Horning has called a preemptive personality. So we are offered and we are sent the kind of products that we will want, and we actually want them once they arrive, right? So there's a kind of power and governance related to this new temporality, time arriving from the future, that might be different both to what Deleuze and Foucault taught us about discipline, but presumably also to what to the control society as we knew it. The tendency is one towards a governing less via regulation than via preemption of individual and collective behaviors in order to cope with the complexities of a globalized and increasingly post-capitalist world of massive flows of persons, of objects, and information. Now, again, this is not something that is just bad. I just spent a few months in LA, and given the climate change, things will just break down. If either people will just stop using their cars, so then things will break down, or they slowly move toward a kind of automated electric mode of individual transportation. And this is impossible without giving away data in a way. But back to preemption. I mean, the reason why I made this a bit abstract time philosophical point before is that it helps showing where the problem really lies with a certain kind of surveillance. If we don't accept that all surveillance is bad. Because preemption implies that the space for dissenting or any kind of deviant behavior is systematically reduced or eliminated. What preemptive surveillance ignores is exactly the difference, or difference one would have said 10 years ago, that develops in any recursive integration of the future into the present. Or to put it less abstract, how knowing about the future doesn't change the present, but also the future. And that yet new options arise that weren't calculated or algorithmically computed in the first place. So both the epistemological and political danger is that the focus on prediction, and even more so on preemption, targets any kind of possibility and, or contingency, and is thus closing down the future. The problem with surveillance, when it leads to a preemptive automatization of the future, is a kind of closed or claustrophobic circuit of present and future with actually neither a proper present or future. What we have then is just a pre-calculated future that reduces or destroys present possibilities. So that's what Google now is after, that it tells you this is what you want to do now and this is what you want to do tomorrow and you will do it. So what I said before about the locative turn and this reterritorialization has its temporal counterpart here. What we witness today is an increasing reduction or identification of what in linguistics are called the deictic categories, here, now, and I. This is what and where you are. This is who you are, this is what you want, this is what we send you. You're Googling, you're making this kind of research from this device in this place of town. That's the kind of advertisement you get, that kind, you know all the examples that soon it will be, for most of us hipsters, it will be worth it to buy like cheap, crappy computers when we try to make a booking for our next flight, because we get better offers, right? If we do it from our expensive iPhone 6s in uptown Manhattan, you know, we pay $100 more, and so on. From my point of view, it's this reduction and limitation to the local, the here and now, that must be broken to reach something like a global level. We have to upscale. And that's not a question of universalizing, but it's a question of navigating, and it demands a kind of emancipatory displacement, really in the Deleuzian sense, a re-territorialization. And this won't be broken by just individual subjective practices like me personally hiding my data. It cannot be done on a kind of individual level, on the local level. For this is a political imperative to produce a difference in the present. This is politically exactly in the opposite way of what politics seems to be for Google and the Silicon Valley. Because what we see there is a kind of post-democratic expert culture. If you read a bit what the Google Government Innovation Lab does with its research for great innovative leaders, as they call it, what they're going for is really, they're really following an idea. For everything there's a solution as long as you have enough data, right? It's a kind of government NSA logic as well. And with political theories like Rancière or so, you could say that that is exactly the opposite of politics. That's policing, that's administration. And it's exactly the result of a data positivism, believing that the data in itself means something, or what other people call the data behaviorism. Anyhow, so I think the political imperative goes to make a difference. And the reason why this is so relevant is exactly the dilemma I mentioned at the beginning, that we are confronting or we are witnessing an excess of data and we don't know how to give it a meaning or a different meaning. The meaning of everything we produce is being given by others, by these companies or government agencies. So we don't know how to make a difference against this automatic classifications that constantly not just put us into boxes, but even worse, that preemptively make us fit into these boxes, which is not a symbolical practice, but an indexical one. It's a kind of practice of pattern recognition and pattern production. So if that sounds a bit abstract now, in order to finish, I wanted to give one example. As I already mentioned, I was a bit at the West Coast, and what one does there is one starts reading like West Coast like theory. So I started reading this. All my colleagues and students told me he's just a nerd. This Jérôme Lanier guy, who's this kind of Silicon Valley celebrity and best-selling author and think tank guy, but who wrote a fairly interesting book called Who Owns the Future? I like the title, so I started reading it. And surprisingly, what he comes up with, that he comes to the conclusion that we live in our information economy that is no longer to be called a capitalist, but rather, as he says, it's a new form of feudalism via what he calls siren servers. Highly connected servers, which led to an extreme asymmetry of information and the lion's share of wealth flowing to those who aggregate those offerings rather than those who provide the raw materials, meaning us. So currently we are caught in a trap of free information, which means two things. We give data away for free and we give it away only in one direction. So the negative aspects of surveillance, and there is no difference here whether it's corporations or government agencies, are caused not by the data in itself, but by this asymmetry. And just to give you one example, I mean, the welfare question would be another one, but to give you one example where this production of meaning and using the data has a kind of concrete importance is the question of pricing. Because what I think we have to do is to learn to produce meaning out of data, as I said, and that means to give it a price. So instead of just being surveyed in a negative sense. Prices are semantically rich. They are full of social and political meaning. Prices are not just contracts, but constructions of the future. And if we live in a time coming from the future, we have to learn from the future, and that means we have to learn to price our activities, mainly producing data all the time. Learning how to price our data is therefore just one example, as I said, in an increasing post-capitalist society. Yeah, that's just one of the examples that could be mentioned here. initially I said like 30 minutes is too long, I just want to talk for 20 minutes. Now I have the excuse to say, like, if I would have more time, I could give you more other examples. Thanks a lot for listening.